think it just hit me so hard because we were making it look like everything was fine. I can understand why people were really surprised to see that there was pain there because we were doing our job. Our job was to be on and to smile. And so when he asked me that, I guess I had felt that it had never occurred to anyone that I wasn't okay and that I had really been suffering. And I had known for a long time and had been asking the institution for help for quite a long time.
Help for what?
After we had gotten back from our Australia tour, which was about a year before that, and we talked about when things really started to turn, when I knew we weren't being protected. And it was during that part of my pregnancy especially that I started to understand what our continued reality was going to look like.
What kind of protection did you want that you feel you didn't receive?
I mean, they would go on the record and negate the most ridiculous story for anyone, right? If I'm talking about things that are super artificial and inconsequential. But the narrative about, making Kate cry, I think was the beginning of a real character assassination, and they knew it wasn't true. And I thought, well, if they're not going to kill things like that, then what are we going to do? Separate from that, and what was happening behind closed doors was, we knew I was pregnant. We now know it's Archie, and it was a boy. We didn't know any of that at the time. We can just talk about it as Archie now. And that was when they were saying they didn't want him to be a prince or a princess, not knowing what the gender would be, which would be different from protocol, and that he wasn't going to receive security.
What?
It was really hard.
What do you mean?
He wasn't going to receive security. This went on for the last few months of our pregnancy, where I'm going, hold on a second.
That your son and Prince Harry's son, was not going to receive security?
That's right. I know.
But how does that work?
How does that work? It's like, no. Because if he's not going to be a prince, it's like, okay, well, he needs to be safe. So we're not saying don't make him a prince or a princess, whatever it's going to be. But if you're saying the title is what's going to affect their protection, we haven't created this monster machine around us in terms of clickbait and tabloid fodder. You've allowed that to happen, which means our son needs to be safe.
So how do they explain to you that your son, the grandson, the great-grandson of the Queen, is not going to he wasn't going to be a prince? How do they tell you that? And what reasons did they give? And then say, and so therefore you don't need protection?
There's no explanation. There's no version. That's the other piece.
Who tells you that?
I heard a lot of it through Harry, and then other parts of it through conversations with family members. And it was a decision that they felt was appropriate. And I thought, well...
Was him being called a prince, Archie being called a prince, was that important to you?
If it meant he was going to be safe, then of course. All the grandeur surrounding this stuff is an attachment that I don't personally have, right? I've been a waitress, an actress, princess, a duchess. I've always just still been Meghan, right? So for me, I'm clear on who I am, independent of that stuff. And the most important title I will ever have is mom. I know that. But the idea of our son not being safe, and also the idea of the first member of color in this family not being titled in the same way that other grandchildren would be. The other piece of that conversation is there's a convention, I don't know if it's George V or George VI convention, that when you're the grandchild of the monarch, so when Harry's dad becomes king, automatically Archie and our next baby would become prince or princess or whatever they're going to be.
So for you, it's about protection and safety, not so much as what the title means
That's
to
a
the
huge
world.
piece of it,
And that having the title gives you the safety and protection.
yeah, but also it's not their right to take it away.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think even with that convention I'm talking about, while I was pregnant, they said they want to change the convention for Archie.
Mm.
Well, why?
Did you get an answer?
No.
You still don't have an answer.
No.
You know, we'd heard the world, those of us out here reading the things or hearing the things, that it was you and Harry who didn't want Archie to have a prince title. So you're telling me that is not true?
No, and it's not our decision to make, right? Even though I have a lot of clarity on what comes with the titles, good and bad, and from my experience, a lot of pain. I, again, wouldn't wish pain on my child, but that is their birthright to then make a choice about.
Okay, so it feels to me like things started to change when you and Harry decided that you were not going to take the picture that had been a part of the tradition for years. And
we weren't asked to take a picture. That's also part of the spin that was really damaging. I thought, can you just tell them the truth? Can you say to the world, you're not giving him a title and we want to keep him safe, and that if he's not a prince, then it's not part of the tradition? Just tell people and then they'll understand. But they wouldn't do that.
But you both obviously were aware that that had been a part of the tradition, and was there a specific reason why you didn't want to be a part of that tradition? I think many people interpreted that as you were both saying, we're going to do things our way, or we're going to do things in a different way.
That's not it at all. I mean, I think what was really hard, so picture now that you know what was going on behind the scenes, right? There was a lot of fear surrounding it. I was very scared of having to offer up our baby, knowing that they weren't going to be kept safe.
You certainly must have had some conversations with Harry about it and have your own suspicions as to why they didn't want to make Archie a prince. What are those thoughts? Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because of his race? And I know that's a loaded question, but
I can give you an honest answer. In those months when I was pregnant, all around this same time, so we have in tandem the conversation of he won't be given security, he's not going to be given a title, and also concerns.
there is a conversation. Hold up.
There's
Stop
several
right now.
There's several conversations.
There's a conversation with you
with Harry
about how dark your baby is going to be?
Potentially, and what that would mean or look like.
And you're not going to tell me who had the conversation?
I think that would be very damaging to them.
Okay. So how does one have that meeting?
That was relayed to me from Harry. Those were conversations that family had with him. And I think
Whoa.
It was really hard to be able to see those as compartmentalized
They were
conversations.
concerned that if he were too brown, that would be a problem. Are you saying that?
I wasn't able to follow up with why, but that if that's the assumption you're making, I think that feels like a pretty safe one. Which was really hard to understand, right? Especially when, look, the Commonwealth is a huge part of the monarchy, and I lived in Canada, which is a Commonwealth country, for 7 years, but it wasn't until Harry and I were together that we started to travel the Commonwealth. I would say 70% of just people of color, right? And growing up as a woman of color, as a little girl.
Are you saying that?
I wasn't able to follow up with why, but if that's the assumption you're making, I think that feels like a pretty safe one. Which was really hard to understand, right? Especially when, look, the Commonwealth is a huge part of the monarchy, and I lived in Canada, which is a Commonwealth country, for 7 years, but it wasn't until Harry and I were together that we started to travel through the Commonwealth. I would say 60-70% of which is people of color, right? And growing up as a woman of color, as a little girl of color, I know how important representation is. I know how you want to see someone who looks like you in certain positions.
Obviously.
Even Archie, like we read these books, and now there's one line and one goes, if you can see it, you can be it. And he goes, you can be it. And I think about that so often, especially in the context of these young girls, but even grown women and men who